Buddy, are you ready for the magazine chapter? Even though this is chapter 9, we're doing it early in this semester because remember, we're not following the chapters in the book. We are following the media in chronological order of their appearance. So we're going to start with a little bit of trivia. Which of these magazines do you think used to have the highest circulation? Which one do you think? Well, it's actually TV Guide, which we don't even need anymore, right? Because we can hop online, or usually most of the television program providers that we use have some sort of a guide on the screen so we can always see what's coming up. But TV Guide is kind of a big deal because it was sold in the checkout lanes at the grocery stores, and it was the first magazine to really do that. So it was a trendsetter, even though it's no longer even necessary. One of the biggest magazines these days is actually AARP, the magazine. They have the Bulletin, and they have a magazine called Modern Maturity. This is provided by AARP, the American Association of Retired People. It's free. It typically comes whenever you turn 50. Now, that hasn't happened to me yet, so fingers crossed. But this is a great idea or a great example of what we were talking about earlier in the semester about broadcasting, narrowcasting, and microcasting. Magazines are terrific examples of narrowcasting because AARP doesn't try to reach the largest possible audience. They're reaching a very specific audience. And as we get further into studying magazines, you'll recognize that they really are, besides the internet, the most narrowcasted medium. So here's a list of magazines and their circulation. And if you notice, this is the top 10. Look, the AARP has 1 and 2. Those are also free. Costco Connection is number 3. That is also free, but it comes with a Costco membership. Better Homes and Gardens, Reader's Digest, Food and Family, Good Housekeeping, National Geographic, Women's Day, and Ladies Home Journal. If you notice, Better Homes and Gardens, Good Housekeeping, Women's Day, and Ladies Home Journal are all very similar to each other, and we're going to talk about them later. They're actually called the Seven Sisters. So if you notice, actually all of these magazines aren't trying to reach the largest possible audience. They're going for a very specific, narrow niche, and that enables them to stay afloat. Think of it. If I sell golf clubs, am I going to spend a gazillion dollars in People magazine? No. I mean, I might reach some golfers, but I'm going to spend my money on Golf Digest because I know that 100% of the people that read Golf Digest, they're my people. They're my customers. So it makes more sense to advertise in a narrow-casted medium. It makes more monetary sense. And remember, they're not in business for public service, right? The advertisers make the magazines possible. Magazines wouldn't exist without them. There's actually 7,200 different magazines in the United States. Is that surprising? And the fastest growing genre, of course, special interest, which is the non-academic term for narrowcasting. But in 1825, there were fewer than 100 magazines in the country. How come? Well, it's very similar to the reason that there was low newspaper circulation. The literacy rate wasn't very high, and the infrastructure was very difficult to actually deliver magazines to people. But by 1850, the number had reached 600 because the infrastructure in the country had increased and improved, and the number of readers had also increased because people were getting to be more literate. The first really successful U.S. magazine is the Saturday Evening Post. You've probably heard of it. Most of its covers were produced by the painter named Norman Rockwell. And I'm sure that you've seen most or many of his Saturday Evening Post covers. The Saturday Evening Post was a very general interest magazine, and it tried to reach the largest possible audience. It was a broadcast magazine, okay? And they included a lot of serialized stories, much like the first really popular newspapers in the United States. So if you put in a story in your magazine and then leave a little cliffhanger, people are more likely to buy the next edition, right? So the Saturday Evening Post kind of set the standard. Reader's Digest started 1922. There's a picture of its first edition. It is also a general interest magazine, and it's printed in 160 different countries, which I think is fascinating. Now, there's certain architecture for magazines, and Reader's Digest is a very specific architecture. It has a flat spine, and it's half the size of what a typical magazine is. Most of these editions have about 30 stories, and that's because they want the reader to have one per day of the month. And it used to be, I think Reader's Digest used to be a lot more popular than it is now. I haven't seen one in ages, but my parents subscribed, and there was always a stack of them around the house. Now, National Geographic started in 1899. What's interesting about National Geographic, well, there's a couple things interesting about National Geographic that I love. It's the architecture, right? It also has a very flat spine. Typically, if a magazine has a flat spine, its target demographic is a little more higher on the socioeconomic chain, okay? It's a little more expensive, a little more highbrow. National Geographic has that flat spine. It also has the yellow border around every single issue. It's also printed on really nice, heavy paper. National Geographic is not a cheap magazine, but it's printed on that heavy paper because so much of it is gorgeous photography. They also do something interesting with their advertising placement. The ads in a National Geographic magazine are usually maybe the first 10 to 15 pages and maybe the last 5 or 6 pages. So once you get into the meat of the magazine, you don't have any ads at all, which I think is pretty interesting. Now, magazines are narrowcasted, but they even go one step further and provide something that your book calls split run editions. What that means is that the Time magazine, for example, that we could buy in St. Louis is going to be different than the Time magazine in New York City or Los Angeles. So they split the editions based on geographic areas so that they can sell more localized ads. But they also split them based on demographics so that if they have data about us, which of course they do, and they know that maybe we have a really high income, they're going to put different ads in the edition that we get. It's really, really smart because they're narrowcasting. And that's called a split run edition. So it's done either geographically or demographically. And remember, your demographics are the statistics that define you as a consumer. Your age, your gender, your income, your zip code, your marital status, your education level, your religion, your sexual orientation. I mean, I could go on and on, but that is how we are defined as consumers. So if they find out certain things about us, they will cater the ads in that demographic split run edition just for us. So there's broadcast, narrowcast, and microcast, and I've warned you a couple chapters ago that we are going to bring this up every chapter, and here we are. A broadcast magazine, remember, is going to try to reach the largest possible audience. Narrowcasted goes for the niche, and that's where most magazines fall. If you can figure out a way to do a microcasted magazine, you'll make a ton of money, because I'm not sure that they exist yet. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So besides the internet, magazines are the most narrowcasted of the mass media. And when we do our magazine activity in class, I'm going to bring in some examples that will really surprise you that the magazines that are available at the St. Louis County Library. Like boat building, wooden boat building in St. Louis. I know it's crazy, but it's fun. So which category of magazines is the most financially successful? You might think, oh, Fortune or Forbes, some magazine that's based about the finance industry. Remember, magazines make most of their money from advertising. And what advertisements are the most effective or most successful? It is the advertisements that occur in magazines read by the people who make most of the purchasing decisions. It's the Seven Sisters, okay? So all of these magazines really more alike than they are different. You know, they have organizing tips, cooking tips, parenting tips, marriage tips, all of that stuff. And they're all more alike than they are different. But the key here, right, is something like 97% of a household's purchasing decisions are made by the woman. I think that men get to choose the truck, the beer, and the insurance, and the razor. I read that somewhere, but it sounds logical, right? So you want, if you have like a consumer product, you want to advertise in one of these magazines because that's how you're going to reach the people who are making the decisions. So these Seven Sisters can charge an arm and a leg for their advertising space because the ads in these magazines work. So there's also something called a magalog, which is a combination magazine catalog. J. Crew is really good at this. Really good at this because you're looking at a magazine that's filled with nothing but ads for J. Crew, but it's also like a catalog. Then there's brand magazines. The Red Bull Bulletin is a great example of this. It's a magazine based around a lifestyle of a brand. And there's advertorials. Now, we see these constantly, and I want you to be able to recognize them. So like this is a page from like a fashion magazine. I think it was from Elle or Vogue or something like that. I think Glamour, actually, now that I think about it. So it looks like the editors have said, oh my gosh, readers, you want these products because we love them and they're so great. That's what it looks like. But really, these products have paid the magazine to be included in something that looks like this. It's an advertorial. So it looks like editorial content of the magazine, but it's really just more paid advertising. And there's a real trend in this, and when we get to the advertising chapter, we'll talk about it. It's called native advertising. It's advertisements that don't really look like ads. They look like just information that nice people are trying to give us. So do magazines add to our culture? Well, that's $1 million question. I think it depends on the magazine. There's so much research that says that women tend to feel really depressed and overweight after looking at a fashion magazine. Like why anybody needs to do research about that is beyond me. Of course, that makes perfect sense. And so some magazine critics, especially of like the fashion magazine, the high-end fashion magazines, criticize magazines for creating something called the beauty contest of life, that we are judged by strictly our appearance. And another way to look at this is something called the aspirational lifestyle. You may have heard that phrase before, but a lot of the really highbrow, high fashion magazines, for example, and not just for women, but for men also, create this idea of a lifestyle which everyone should aspire to, where you sit around in gorgeous black and white photos and drink cocktails on a roof of a building wearing fabulous clothes, like things that never really happen in real life, right? And there's a reason for this. Because remember, magazines exist to sell ads, right? They wouldn't exist otherwise. What kind of advertising would Cosmo or Vogue or Men's Health be able to sell if we were all really content with our bodies? Be hard, right? Because if you think about it, so much of these magazines are for vitamins or supplements or skincare, diet fads, your hair, oh my God, I mean, tooth bleaching, you name it. The magazines want us to constantly try to improve ourselves by buying the products that are advertised in the magazines. So magazines will never have an article telling you how you should be satisfied with your body or your appearance the way it is, because that's counterproductive to their economic structure. Does that make sense? And I know I sound really cynical, but I mean, I love magazines, but I understand the role they play. Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you a few examples, and I pulled these all from one magazine. I want you to ask yourself, what do the men look like? What are they doing, and what are they thinking? Okay, so there's David Beckham. And this is compared to ads that feature women. I'm going to move my face again. There we go. Okay. Now we've got men on the right, women on the left. Remember, this was the same. I pulled these out of one magazine. What do you notice? We'll talk about this a little more in class, but if you notice, the women are typically in a group. They're filmed in color. In many cases, their mouths are open. It's called clowning. They're clowning around. The men, on the other hand, are filmed in black and white. They are alone, they're independent, and they are showing zero emotion. Look, let's go through it again. Look, black and white. No emotion, no emotion, no emotion, no emotion. But the girls just want to have fun. See how this works? Now, I'm not saying that if you look at one fashion magazine, it's going to mess up how you view gender, but I'm saying over the course of a lifetime, is it possible that seeing ads like this influence the way we think of gender and how in our culture boys aren't supposed to cry or show emotion and girls just want to have fun? Okay, something to think about. And this is kind of fun. How do you advertise the same product to two different audiences? Well, this actually happens pretty regularly, and you might be surprised. So for example, here's a Rolex ad with Roger Federer. Okay. This appeared in Sports Illustrated. Now, this is a Rolex ad that appeared in Popular Mechanics. It's the same product, but it's advertised differently. So on the left, you're advertising to sports fans. And on the right, you're advertising to engineers. So you're going to explain how the watch is made. Nobody reading Sports Illustrated cares about that, but nobody reading Popular Mechanics is going to be influenced by an ad with Roger Federer. So if you go into advertising, you want to make sure that you are able to advertise your product to different markets. Here's one. This is for Rosetta Stone. He was a hardworking farm boy. She was an Italian supermodel. He knew he would have just one chance to impress her. Okay. This was from Rolling Stone, target market, guys in their 20s. This one was from National Review. One day his son would speak to the world. He wanted them to understand. So the target market for this is not 20-year-old boys, because they typically don't read National Review. It's middle-class men, primarily, and National Review is a conservative magazine. So you're advertising the same product, but in two different ways. This is a really old example, but I love it so much. It's so cheesy and so old. But here's an ad for candies that appeared in 17 magazine. Here's the ad in Cosmo. Okay, so the ad is fairly similar, but the one in Cosmo has a really hard cylindrical object heading straight for her privates. Same thing here, ad for candies. This is the one that was in 17 magazine. Here's the one that was in Cosmo. So you've got a little bit of butt crack there and some condoms on the counter. So they know their media well enough that they know this ad wouldn't fly in 17 magazine. This ad's for Cosmo. This is the one that needs to go in 17. So I want you to start paying attention to the way different products are advertised to different markets. Here's one for soft soap. This was in Cosmo, but this one was in Ebony. Here's one for Zappos. Now this was in the back of Ladies Home Journal, and notice how she looks kind of uptight like she's a librarian or something, right? And this is all about the money back guarantee that Zappos provides. But this one is a Zappos ad, and it was in Rolling Stone, and it's music to your feet. Same product, advertised different ways. But this is my favorite example. This is an ad about the US military, and it's aimed at parents. This was in Time magazine, okay? Notice how it's very bare bones, facts, black and white. This is an ad for the Navy, and this was in Rolling Stone, and it says that there are SEALs, like 6 or 7 Navy SEALs in this photo, and you can't see them. So this is targeted towards anyone who has a real sense of adventure, and maybe even a sense of danger. You're not going to advertise to parents like this, right? So the product is the same. The military advertised in different ways. So I hope that you can start paying attention to these ads in magazines, how they're targeted, how they're placed, and how magazines are actually built. So we're going to have a good time doing magazine activities when we're in class, and I'll see you there. Bye-bye.